Pittsburgh, Massachusetts. Les vamos a contar la historia.
Lo que habló el alcalde de Boston, Mary Walsh, hace unos momentos sobre las actualizaciones.
Por primera vez, un análisis del debate que se acaba de realizar.
Esa política monetaria que sí es como un chorro que abre.
Con el mejor seguro médico que a lo mejor estás buscando.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech para Todos virtual town hall, hosted by Latinos for Education in partnership with El Mundo Boston. My name is Juana Matias, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Mass Inc. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you and to collaborate with my friends at Latinos for Education and Senator Ed Markey to elevate issues around digital equity. For those unfamiliar with Latinos for Education, the organization is a Boston-based national education nonprofit focused on developing, placing, and connecting essential Latino talent in the education sector. It is mobilizing a network of skilled education leaders to ensure the voice of students and families is not just heard, but factored into decision-making in schools, communities, and education institutions throughout the United States. We would like to begin by thanking Senator Ed Markey for being with us here today to discuss this urgent topic and for his ongoing commitment to addressing the digital divide that plagues our state and country. A big thank you as well to Alberto Vasallo and his incredible team at El Mundo Boston for their partnership on today's program and their continued support of the Latino community and education. Today's discussion will focus on the impact the digital divide is having on Latino families and students in the and across the country. In August, Latinos for Education published a report, Latino Education in the Time of COVID, which highlighted the pandemic's unique impact on Latino students and families. In response to the findings of the report, the organization has mobilized multi-sector leaders to address the digital divide and provide critical guidance to decision makers on what interventions are needed to ensure tech equity for Latino students. This work has led to the launch of the Tech para Todos campaign, which is urging the legislature and local districts to deploy adequate resources that will ensure that Latino students and families have equitable access to technology. Those interested in learning more about the campaign and joining the efforts can learn more at bit.ly/techparatodosma. Now, we know that this work is more critical than ever. In the spring of this year, school districts were presented with the daunting challenge of needing to transition to a fully remote model. While wealthy school districts were better equipped to deal with the transition, gateway cities and rural communities did not have the same level of resources to serve all of their students and faced far more complex challenges supporting students and families' engagement and continued connection to schools. By spring, lower income communities like Chelsea saw online student participation rates as low as 30%. Lower participation rates in lower income communities were attributed to a wide variety of issues, such as device access, broadband, connectivity issues, mental health challenges, and older children and teens thrusted into caregiver roles while their parents worked on the front lines. Over the course of the summer, school districts and state leaders worked diligently to plan for increased digital equity to ensure that the fall experience for all students was well improved, especially our most vulnerable learners, including English language learners and students with special needs. However, as the school year began across the Commonwealth, it is evident that gaps in engagement, devices, connectivity persist for our hardest hit communities. Today, nearly 1/4 of gateway city households do not have internet service, and another 10% rely on unstable connections, such as mobile phone. An even higher proportion, 28% of gateway city households do not have a computer at home. It is evident that now, more than ever, we need tech para todos. We hope that today's panel and town hall discussion will shed light on the many challenges our students are facing and provide new solutions to consider that will help increase access to technology and digital literacy for our most marginalized students. And now, I want to turn it over to our amazing cohort of panelists to introduce themselves briefly. Manny, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Juana. It's good to be with you. My name is Manny Cruz, and I'm the Advocacy Director of Massachusetts at Latinos for Education. I'm excited to be helping our organization in our advocacy work and to be tapping into my previous experience as a State House staffer, serving under both our moderator, the former State Representative Juana Matias, and State Representative Paul Tucker out of Salem. In addition to my state service, I've also had the honor and privilege of serving our children and families in Salem as the first Afro-Latino elected to serve on the Salem School Committee. It is an honor to be here with all of you today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorena Lopera, and I serve as the Executive Director of Latinos for Education here in Massachusetts. I'm an immigrant to this country, and I grew up in a community much like Chelsea that we know has been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. I'm also a mother to Joaquin, my 6-year-old son, who's currently enrolled in Boston Public Schools. And so I'm coming to this conversation with both my personal and professional lens. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Lorena. Amanda.
Sí, buenas tardes a todos. It's nice to be here today. Thank you. I'm Amanda Fernandez. I'm the CEO and founder of Latinos for Education. And as Juana so eloquently presented our organization, we are one of the nation's first and only Latino founded and led organizations that solely focus on education leadership and advocacy. We are centering the voices of our students and families, our Latino educators, in discussions and decision-making about education. We believe that our nation will be stronger when we prioritize the needs of the Latino students. And we know that we play an important role in helping our community achieve equitable access to educational opportunity. We want to be sure that Latino children and their families can pursue higher education and be workforce and life ready. We also believe that our education system will be strengthened by the representation from the schoolhouse to the state house of Latino voices and backgrounds. We believe it's essential that there be much more diversity in decision making given the diverse population of the students that we serve. I am also part of a dynamic, multicultural and multilingual organization that is reflective of the direction that our Commonwealth and that the country is headed. So I'm excited to be representative of our organization and where we're headed, but equally excited to have Senator Markey join us today for this important conversation specific to the Latino community.
Sorry about that. My mic was muted. Senator Markey, I think you don't need an introduction. The state of Massachusetts knows you well, and we are thankful for the service and leadership you've given on our behalf in our communities. But I would like to start off with you, and we'd love you to share a little bit about the current education issues and priorities that are being considered in the Senate, and what would you like to see be the focus over the next 100 days?
Well, first of all, want to thank you so much. Thank you for all you do every single day. Thanks to Mass Inc. But you're just such a great leader. And thanks so much to Amanda and Lorena and to Manny for all of their great work on a daily basis. Just absolutely incredible. All of the great work which you do for our Commonwealth and providing leadership for the whole country. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And to El Mundo, thank you, El Mundo, for being our ability to make sure that this message gets out. the need to discuss these issues to make sure they are top of the line, absolutely critical issues that we have to work on. So I can't thank you enough for everything that you are doing for the Commonwealth. Look, we're in a crisis right now. Bottom line, this is an educational crisis in the United States of America. This pandemic has shown an incredible light on it. It's something that we just have to realize is front and center, and that we have to make sure that these issues get dealt with. So from my perspective, this is a moment in time where we recognize that, and this is an incredible number, 16 million American children do not have the internet at home. 16 million. And who are they? Well, they're disproportionately Black and brown and immigrant children. There are rural kids as well, but if you're looking at the profile of who is going to be left behind, it's the reason why we need to have this forum today, because we're going to be in a situation here where a child doesn't go to school for the entire 3rd grade or 5th grade. They won't have it at home. They won't have an ability to be able to fully participate. And so we need to just deal with this crisis as it is unfolding. So back in 1996, I was successful as the author of something called the E-Rate. And the E-Rate is the program that provides access on the school desk for children. So in Chelsea, Roxbury, Lawrence, Brockton, Lynn, the E-Rate is what helps to pay in substantial measure for having the internet on the desk of all children. And it's a $52 to $54 billion program that I created back when the Telecommunications Act was passed. And it's a little tax on people's phone calls. It all piles up to a lot of money that gets spent on making sure that kids get it. Now, when the program started, only 14% of classrooms in the United States had the internet, but it went to near ubiquity. Everyone had it. And again, the E-Rate, the education rate, helps to defray those costs. Well, now we're in a pandemic where kids are going to be learning from home. And we don't know when we're going back to normal. We can hope that there's a vaccine. We can hope that we're going to come out on the other end of this very soon, but we have to plan for something that is going to have a longer duration because we know that the absence of access to the internet is going to have a long-term profound impact on young people. So Massachusetts over the years has received about $740 million to provide access to especially poor schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I'm very proud of this program. It also creates the connections for libraries so that kids can just go in to libraries, whether they're in Salem or Lynn or Boston or Brockton, and there it is, ready for their use. Well, that's all part of my program that I created. And it's disproportionately funded in a way that helps those that come from the poorest communities. It's designed to create that kind of access. So today, we know that at least 140,000 residents still can't even access broadband services, can't even access it. And we know who is going to be, again, disproportionately adversely affected. Juana already laid out the statistics in Massachusetts right now, and they're shocking in terms of the impact that coronavirus is going to have upon young people in our Commonwealth. So we need to provide billions of additional dollars that will be used in order to help. So what I've been able to do is to get all of my Senate Democratic colleagues to sign on with me so that we can augment my E-Rate program with $4 billion additional dollars, $4 billion, so that the Federal Communications Commission can make sure that that funding is there for the cities and towns across the Commonwealth and across the country. And Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have refused to allow us to put together a comprehensive package that would make it possible for us to send that funding out through the Federal Communications Commission. By the way, it's necessary because the Federal Communications Commission disagrees with me in my interpretation of my law that the FCC, Ajit Pai as the chairman, can use E-rate funding that exists right now for people at home, for kids at home. They in a Republican era reject that analysis. So from my perspective, it is absolutely essential that we provide leadership on that issue. And I will just step back and talk about this in a larger sense. We are saying as Democrats, we need cities and towns to get the funding writ large for their budgets, for our schools, for our teachers, for police, for fire. Cities are going to have to make very tough choices in terms of what gets funded if there is not a huge financial package that does pass that goes back to the cities and towns. And so from my perspective, that's also what I am fighting for on the floor of the United States Senate, to make sure that that funding happens as well. So if these 16 million kids don't get it, there's going to be a homework gap that leads to a learning gap that's going to lead to an opportunity gap for these young people. And they're going to know it as well, because if you're poor, you have the same digital skill capability as a kid out in the suburbs. If you have the device, if you have access to it, you're just as good at it. But you know it when you don't have it. You know it when you're being left behind, and that is going to be a tragedy in our society. We don't want young people to be thinking that way about our government. I mean, for better or worse, the E-rate was originally structured by me in order to make sure that we dealt with the structural racism that's built into our educational system in the United States. That's why I designed it that way. So it goes disproportionately to the poorest communities. And we can see it here as well, where the structural racism in our society and the educational system now doesn't provide the funding to make sure that kids have the devices or the access at home that will allow them to compete with kids that come from wealthier homes. So children represent only 20% of our population, but they're 100% of our future. And we have to invest in each and every single one of them. So from my perspective, we need that $4 billion, and we're going to get it one way or the other. Either the Republicans are going to come together and work with us on a bipartisan basis, or as soon as Joe Biden is sworn in, that'll be one of the first things we do, is to make sure that money goes out to the schools. But in addition, and you're talking about the first 100 days, it's also going to be imperative that we pass a comprehensive broadband bill so that everyone has it at home. And I'm co-sponsoring legislation that will spend $100 billion to make sure everyone has the broadband at home, urban or rural. It's going to be like water or electricity. You have to have it if you're going to be able to compete in the 21st century. So absolutely essential. And finally, I also, I'm the author of the National Broadband Plan for the Future Act. That's a bill that will require the FCC to just completely upgrade the plan that we need for our country to make sure that the internet, that broadband is accessible for everyone, and everything that we do in our society, we need to do that as well. So I can't thank each and every one of these great leaders on the call today, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing the conversation.
Thank you, Senator Markey, for the work you've been doing in Congress on behalf of our community. I think you brought up a really interesting point in light of the fact that the pandemic has led to projection of budget deficits, both at the state level and at the federal level. And We know that at least in the state of Massachusetts, we haven't invested in our students of color at the rate that we should have for decades. We were trying to address this wrong with the Student Opportunity Act, which now is at risk and not being level funded moving forward. And now this is all being compounded by what you said, whether students are really learning remotely and are they having the same experience and having access to the same resources. And I think this really segues us into our next question, Amanda, and it's, could you speak to the state of the Latino education across the country and what policymakers should be doing to create a more equitable education system for Latino students?
Yes, thank you for the question, and a good segue to this part of the conversation, because what we're talking about here is not just an impending opportunity gap for low-income kids due to lack of tech access. It's that Latino students are already starting far behind their white peers in school. So I'm going to give a little bit of context on what is happening across the country that I believe is also reflective of what is happening here in the Commonwealth relative to the state of Latino education. So let's just start with saying that we are the future, Latino students and families, we are the future of our economy and our nation. So let's just start with that as the premise for why we need to be addressing tech equity issues, but many other issues in the education system. Latinos make up about 25% of the student population across the country. And in very short order, we're going to see 1 in 3 entrants into the school system who identify as Latino across the Commonwealth, across the country. In the Commonwealth, we have 14 districts that have over 40% Latino student population. We are the fastest growing, and we, on a positive note, are the fastest growing in terms of college entrance into higher education. So, much like my staff, these students are multicultural, multilingual, and still have to overcome adversities because that's not always valued. And so those adversities extend beyond the classroom, despite the fact that this diversity of language and culture and background is what makes up the richness and fabric of our society and an asset to our country. So while we have challenges, we are also a tremendous asset to this nation as an overall community. With that said, it is important that we see the success of Latino students as critical to the success of our nation. And so when we think about the fact that we are such a large demographic, the largest growing demographic, when you think about it, when you invest in Latinos, you invest in the prosperity of the nation. Some of the equity challenges that we are addressing are not symptomatic solely to Massachusetts. The first being opportunity and access to funding for our low-income communities, as both Senator Markey, you and Juana both talked about. And so we know that there are significant financial gaps in budgets, for school budgets for serving low-income kids, and very much affecting Latino students. This also is compounded by the fact that, we have inequitable access around high rigor coursework. Access to enrollment in courses like calculus are 20% plus less than they are for high schools with more white representative students. So we're seeing gaps of 33% for Latinos accessing high quality coursework to 56% of our white counterparts. This also persists or exists across access to AP courses. This is a well-known issue where this level of coursework is offered at much lower levels in low-income high schools and communities. So when we think about what we need to do to prepare our students. We're already for jobs of the future, which have technology as part of it. STEM classes are not as available to our students. And so this starts to compound the challenge and then add to it this technology gap. So not only can you not take the classes, but even if you had the classes, you wouldn't have the tools to actually do the classes at the level that you need to in many instances and for far too many students. The second issue I'll talk about is around representation, and it is very core to the work of Latinos for Education and why we do the work that we do. Right now, over 80% of the teaching force is white in our country, and that percentage has stayed the same for many years, even though, as we know, our nation demographics are changing dramatically every year. And so at this point, we have a disproportionate amount of Latino educators and leaders, about 8%, relative to a 25% student body. So that is an issue for us because we know that that diversity matters, that representation matters in our classrooms. Our students need to see the role models. They need to feel safe and connected and valued for who they are and what they bring to the classroom experience. And this is not only an issue in the classroom or classroom teachers and representation, but this is also an issue on school boards and our on the halls of the state capitol building and who the decision makers are, as well as our school leadership. So we, Latinos for Education, exists because of this particular issue in the education sector. Lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about, the third kind of category here around academic opportunity and access to it. So again, let's look at a bright spot, which is despite the fact that there are these academic barriers that Latino students face, we are seeing much higher levels over the last 10 years or so of Latino high school completion and college enrollment. Now, again, there's a lot more work to do there, but we are seeing that those opportunities are opening up more. That doesn't negate the fact, though, that we continue to experience these significant academic gaps, and the level playing field does not exist as early childhood, because we are seeing kids across the country who are not accessing early childhood and so are starting at a deficit and a gap in terms of access. Not because they're not capable, it's because the opportunity is not there. And so this challenge, as we know, persists through when you start without that opportunity in your own community to access schooling and education. It persists through third grade with our third grade reading levels. It persists through eighth grade on our math and English language arts, as we're seeing, again, as a microcosm with our NCAS scores and what that looks like for students in the Commonwealth. We see 50% of our students not accessing the opportunity that they deserve. So with that said, while the gaps continue to carry on through post-secondary education, we want to make sure that all the way through, Latino students are getting the support that they need, not only in K through 12, but in higher ed, so that they can persist and be successful. So what do we need? We need to be in partnership with our policymakers and look to the advocacy organizations like ours and look to the families and the students to be thinking about how we reimagine education from cradle to career, because the pipeline is broken. It's broken for our students. And as we know, and I think Senator Markey, you alluded to, the system is operating exactly as it was designed to operate. But the fact of the matter is that we are at a point in time, COVID gives us this unique opportunity to say, what does education have to look like How does it need to be different for Latino and Black students in particular so that we change the game? And so we look forward to the level of partnership to advocate for the types of policies that will remove those barriers to opportunity for our kids.
Amanda, thank you so much for really doing justice to the issue of inequity in education, talking about the fact that it's something that's persisted and existed for generations, the multifaceted components that exist in terms of the achievement gap. Because I think, yes, COVID is kind of painting this bright light on inequities, but these inequities have existed from the very beginning. And I think COVID does present a new facet of challenges, right? Housing, healthcare that impact education and a student's ability to learn and a family's ability to support their children in learning. And I think it's a perfect follow-up for Lorena. We know that COVID-19 has created significant disruption in our public education system, local and state economies. But can you elaborate further on the impact COVID is having on Latino families and students in Massachusetts?
Thank you, Juana, for that question, and thank you for guiding us through this conversation. I also just want to give a quick gracias to el equipo of El Mundo for partnering with us on this important conversation. And of course, thank you to Senator Markey for taking the time to join us today to discuss the ways in which we're helping the Latinx community achieve greater equity through education. So to your question, currently in Massachusetts, Latinos make up 12.3% of the state population and over 22% of students across the state. And in many key districts, Latino children are a much higher percentage of the student population. For instance, in Boston, it's 42%, in Springfield, it's 67%, in Lawrence, it's 93%, right? And those are just to name a few. And at the same time, Latinos make up 30% of our state's COVID-19 cases. So for months, this pandemic has decimated our community with disparities that, as we've just said, have long existed, have been exacerbated by this public health crisis. We recently at Latinos for Education surveyed Latinx families across the state to really hear about how COVID-19 has been impacting their children's education. And what they told us was 46% of families recognized that their child was experiencing learning loss as a result of the pandemic. 74% of families are worried about income insecurity or food insecurity as a result of this pandemic. 21% of our families identified that their households need access to devices and connectivity in order to support their child's education. Now, we know that all of these issues are interrelated. And while our students and our community are facing many challenges, digital access and connectivity is one of the most time sensitive because everything is connected to that at this moment. And honestly, it should be one of the easiest to solve, right? At this point, when everything from learning to accessing health and social services has gone virtual, lacking a device or connectivity is unacceptable because it puts families in great danger. For students, it's almost as if they're not enrolled in school and they're in the shadows of our education system. We must ensure tech para todos, that everyone has the technology they need to participate. At Latinos for Education, we've been actively monitoring the tech gaps that exist across the Commonwealth. And we've been pushing for universal access to technological devices and internet connectivity for all students, but especially for our Latinx students. We know at this moment that not every student in Massachusetts has access to a device or connectivity. In Boston alone, where my child goes to school, the latest data shows that at least 2,700 students don't have reliable internet access. And we can assume that these are conservative estimates. I think it's really important to recognize that while a tremendous effort has been deployed by local officials to adapt to these circumstances, we can and we must do better. We have to continue to innovate and bring the business community and corporate partners into the conversation because they need to be a part of this solution. And we must be willing to think boldly, right, to reimagine the future that we want for our cities and our schools by considering options like mesh networks and finally transitioning broadband access to a public utility right? So that connectivity is no longer a barrier to success for anyone in our state. And I think the other piece is we really need to listen to and meet those who have long been underserved by our education system, because they are the communities, they are the people who have the solutions that we need for our current problems. I think that there are many complicated challenges facing us today, but this doesn't have to be one of them. The solutions exist to ensure that every student has access to the devices and broadband connectivity that is needed for them to attend school and participate in learning opportunities. And in order for our student population across the Commonwealth to be successful, as Amanda mentioned, Latino students and families must be successful. That's why at Latinos for Education, we're going to continue to advocate to close the tech divide. And that is why we ask all of you who are listening to join us by clicking on the link on your screen and joining our work, signing our letters to decision makers, sharing our Tech para Todos on social media. Solving this is not only possible, but it is critical that we meet this moment with the creativity and boldness that it requires.
Thank you so much, Lorena. I think you covered a lot of points there that really should be considered by our policymakers, by our agency heads, in terms of what we could be doing to ensure that the impacts of COVID-19 really do not continue to hinder Latino academic success. And now I think, we talk about the state and what the legislature can do in terms of resources, in terms of policy to undo wrongs in public education for students of color. But we also know that our local governments play a critical role. Our city mayors, our school committee members, they're on the ground, they're talking to parents and teachers, and they play an important role in making sure that we're really addressing things in a way that speaks to the needs of their communities. And so, Manny, I know you're a member of the Salem Public School Committee. Can you share what you've been hearing from students, teachers, and families around their needs during these uncertain times? And what are some of the strategies the Salem Public School Committee has implemented to mitigate some of these negative impacts?
Thank you, Juana, for the question and for your service today in leading our conversation as the moderator. I'm just so thrilled to have this opportunity to be working with you again. And you're right, this is very difficult at the local level. This is where the decisions are made for our families, for our educators, and our students. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Senator Markey for joining us in this space and for taking the time to elevate the voices working towards equity for our Latino students. And I'm so proud to stand here with my colleagues who clearly have been trailblazers in advocating for the needs of our most vulnerable students in our Latino student population. So currently in Salem, we're fortunate to have diverse leadership on both our school committee and the office of the superintendent. I count my lucky stars every single day that Dr. Reich and his team and our educators are at the helm leading our district. We have a mayor in Kim Driscoll who has prioritized education in every single budget every year that she's been mayor. We sit in a normal year 30% above net spending. But despite having some of these ideal systems in place prior to COVID, we were not equipped to deal with the challenges of the pandemic. In Salem, we grappled with stopping on a dime and changing our instruction to fully remote. And that was difficult for so many families and educators and our students who are hurting during the pandemic. We had to make some tough decisions as school committee members, and we had to cut back our budget to the tune of $3 million and pass the level service budget. We asked all of our friends in the union and non-union personnel to sacrifice personally. And as a result, we were able to pass a school budget that preserved jobs, but it meant that we would have less of the supports that we were accustomed to in terms of instructional coaches, redesign consultants, and we had to cut back on so many unfilled positions that we desperately needed. And so when I think about our educators and what I've heard from them, first, I take tremendous pride in what they were able to do for our students. And yet, I must still acknowledge that teaching in this environment is a challenge. Attendance and engagement remain a challenge. We see black screens in classrooms that reflect some of the findings that we saw in our report at Latinos for Education. Our students and their mental health, the challenges of poverty. There's so many children that don't want to engage because Poverty forces them to feel shame about where they live in their environment. So, and these students had these challenges beforehand, but they were invisible, and now they're black screens. And that's a message that we can't ignore. I think about our parents and what I've heard from them. So many of them share the concerns that I have as a school committee member about health, about safety, about equity, about the instruction that our students are receiving. And I'm deeply concerned about the parents that are left in the shadows, that we still, despite our earnest efforts, aren't able to reach. And so when I think about this pandemic and the way that it's impacted our community, it's just staggering. And the last piece is our students. They're remarkable. They're resilient. I think that they have really awakened to advocacy for themselves. I hear our students still to this day talking about racial injustice, the Black Lives Matter movement, climate change, but they're struggling too. Both of my colleagues are parents, and I have some colleagues on the school committee that I serve with that are. And I know the challenges that they face trying to be a working professional while also trying to help their student access their education. And I think about my own story and what it would have meant for me to be a student in the Salem Public Schools as I was during this time. It meant that I would have had a single mom, an immigrant, raising 3 boys with 1 computer in the household, living in poverty, in a school system that didn't always do the best job of communicating in the language that was spoken at home. And when I think about the families that go through that as a school committee member, it's my job to speak for them and to provide them with agency. And that's the work that we do every single day at our school committee. So in response to what I think has been inadequate federal response and resources, we've had to upgrade our buildings, provide PPE, and do the hard work of ensuring all of our kids can connect. And so many teachers have had to choose between their personal health and the profession that they love. So when I think about what we need to be successful, I certainly think we need more testing resources, more dollars to continue to upgrade our buildings so that they're safe and more students can return. And then we have to have tech para todos. Lorena, Amanda, the senator, I think all of us are in agreement here. We need to be doing all that we can, our federal policymakers, our state leaders, to ensure that every single child can connect and be fully engaged, in recognition of the fact that this is likely to be a 2 to 3 year pandemic with waves of switching back from in-person instruction to remote and so forth. And in Salem, we're seeing our parents, 82% of them at this point are saying that they would love in-person instruction. And we have a meeting on Monday to decide what our in-person model is going to look like. And I want more kids back in buildings. But the fact of the matter is, we're not ready to take on the entire district. And so in terms of strategies for mitigation, we've been fortunate that our state leaders at DESE have taken some of the right steps. We've received sizable remote learning technology acquisition grants. The CARES Act money has been coming in, and we've been able to get the Chromebooks that we need. But our district, like many others, ran into an international shortage in July of Chromebooks that led to a back order of about 1,700 devices, even though we put the order in back in May. And as a result, we have 3,900 students. Many of them were anxious about when they'd be getting their device. And so we went back to DESE and our state leaders and asked them, could we get some assistance with a procurement process so that we could accelerate, because the international shortage was simply out of our control. And we were able to successfully do that, and we had to tier our supports for our students. So we were able to secure through that process about 400 Chromebooks for our priority students. And thankfully, we just had another 450 Chromebooks that came in for the regular order. So we have a stockpile, but nonetheless, as a school committee member, where I'm keeping my eye on the ball is on the long-term issue of broadband access, because even though we've been able to negotiate with Comcast for a Comcast Essentials program that's affordable for families, $10 a month, the issue is if you have 3 boys in a home with an immigrant mom trying to connect at the same time, there's not enough bandwidth to be a fully engaged student. So we need to continue to have conversations about reform of broadband, investment in our communities that are targeted to the students that need us the most, because those are the students that will have and continue to have the persistent opportunity gaps. And I want every student in our public schools to have the same opportunities that I had to attend Northeastern University, to be the advocacy director at Latinos for Education and to be a part of this conversation today. And so that's the work that we've been doing. We've been creative. We've tried our best to offer some solutions that are outside of the box. We run at SATV, our local access television class, kindergarten, because we understand that some of our families are unable to connect. But these are short-term solutions that don't necessarily translate to the most equity. And fundamentally, we need to get our students back in buildings, and we hope to do so in short order. And this is the work that many districts are faced with now. But I'm confident that with advocates like ourselves and policymakers coming together to share experiences and to build coalitions, that we can close these gaps. But the time is now, and we certainly continue to need Tech para Todos.
Manny, thank you for being so comprehensive. I think you bring up a point that just shows how critical funding is to ensuring that our students continue to learn. You mentioned the CARES Act and how that money trickled in and allowed your school district to meet the need where it was at. And, you know, we're in just a couple of days facing the eviction moratorium will be going up here in Massachusetts. We don't, as the senator mentioned in his opening remarks, we haven't come to an additional deal for supplemental funding for our state. And can we just imagine what that would look like? You know, our students are already not learning because of the digital divide, lack of access to technology. Imagine now that family being faced with an eviction and one of our housing courts. I mean, it's just going to compound the issue. You know, we already know our gateway cities, you find families living, multiple families living in one unit. It puts them at greater risk for contracting COVID. So clearly, there's a lot of work and support that we need from the federal government to ensure that people can stay in their homes and that things are not exacerbated. And Senator Markey, you've heard from our panelists, you heard from Amanda. She shared with us that, you know, Latino students are the future workforce of this country and the state. We know that Massachusetts is a knowledge-based economy, and it only benefits us to ensure that these students are actually receiving access to an education and upward economic mobility because it benefits sustaining our state. You heard from Lorena. She talked about the unprecedented need when it came to food security and how we really need to make sure that in Massachusetts, we lead by example and that we ensure every student, regardless of class and race, has access to tech. And lastly, we heard from Manny. Talk about teachers and our administrators, people who did put their health at risk, who were required to put aside prepping curriculums and thinking about the school year to really think about how do we operationalize what a hybrid model looks like, what remote learning looks like. There's clearly been a loss to the attention that our curriculums really deserve. And so what do you think you could be working on? And could you tell us about some of the legislative proposals you have before the Senate and what your vision is for closing the digital divide and how we can achieve greater equity for the Latino community?
Thank you, Juana. And again, this is absolutely fascinating, what I've heard today. It's a blistering, scalding indictment of the inadequacy of the federal response to this crisis at the state and local levels in the United States of America. And I heard Lorena say 30% of all those who have contracted coronavirus are from the Latinx community, that 46% believe that their children are having a learning loss, that 74% believe that they have income and food insecurity issues that they have to deal with. And that 21% of all children need devices and access at home. And all of this relates to the need for the federal government to provide more help. So a vision without funding is an hallucination. You know, the president says everything's okay, don't worry about it. And even yesterday and today, he's going, well, you know, and when young people get coronavirus, it's just 99.9%. They're okay. So it's this kind of crazy thinking that keeps emanating out of the Oval Office, that everything's okay, we're going to make it through, is sowing the seeds again, as I said before, a real tragedy for young people from the Latinx community across our country. My father grew up on the first floor of a triple-decker in Lawrence, with 5 brothers and sisters, 88 Phillip Street in South Lawrence. That's where we're from. And my father's son is a United States Senator. So we know the system works if you give people access to the education, access to the healthcare, which their families need. My mother was one of 5 daughters of an immigrant family from Ireland in Malden, but my grandmother died when my mother was 17, so my mother had to be the mother for the younger 3 sisters. The system was one of the girls has to stay home, even though she was going to be senior class president in Malden. So again, her son is a United States Senator. So for me, I'm looking at this and I know that I'm white, and I didn't have a fraction of the burdens which young people who are Black or brown have in our society today. And we have to make sure that we're conscious and intentional of those barriers and ensure that there's a democratization of access to opportunity through healthcare, education, and breaking down discriminatory barriers. That has to be the agenda. We have to put justice on the ballot on November 3rd. And that's educational justice, healthcare justice, racial justice, environmental justice. It has to be on the ballot. People have to be out there and working over these final 18 days. And then on January 20th of next year, we'll put justice on the floor of the United States Senate for a vote on each and every one of these areas to get the funding which is necessary to go into the hands of all the local leaders so they can provide the help for all of these young people who are our future. President Trump keeps trying to demonize Latinx, Black communities. That's who he is. He says that's really what's dragging America down. But the truth is, that's what's making America great. That's what's making America great in the 21st century. So we need more funding. We need an expanded E-rate. We need to make sure broadband is an essential in every single home, and that we have a federal program that guarantees that. And that has to be part of a big infrastructure bill next year. We have to get hundreds of billions of dollars, which go back to the cities and towns, so that the mayors, the school committees, the boards of selectmen and city councils have the funding they need to make sure their schools and other community assets have what they need. So that just has to be our priority. And by the way, let's not shortchange. Yes, I think we should talk about it. We need more PPE, more testing, more contact tracing. If we're going to do this, it's not a question of a date when everyone can go back to school. It's a question of data. Do we have the data that can guarantee that we can put children back into those settings, because they can become carriers to their parents and their grandparents very easily, and we're seeing a spike already in Massachusetts in that regard. So I just want to really tell you how inspiring it was to hear everyone today, just absolutely brilliant, and how much I'm looking forward to partnering with you. And if there's anything that you need specifically, if you please let me know, I will be there and fighting for you for all those issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Markey. I could not agree more with you that we cannot fix what we don't measure, and hopefully we'll continue to track data. And I'm really convinced and reaffirmed that we will tackle these issues in light of the fact that we have a nonprofit organization like Latinos for Education in Massachusetts, taking on these issues head on and making sure that we're holding our agencies and elected officials accountable. We're going to hand it off to the CEO of Latinos for Education, Amanda Fernandez, to provide some closing remarks for us.
Thank you all. It was just great to hear so many perspectives, and as always, proud of my team and just this panel of next generation and current leaders in addressing and tackling these issues and bringing their perspective to bear. So again, we've talked about it a lot. We know that COVID-19 has exacerbated the inequities that persist in Latino communities. But now more than ever, we know that it is a critical time to act. We need to really focus on reimagining and rebuilding our education system in a way that really centers the voice and the backgrounds and the perspectives of our communities. That has to be the way that we see all students succeed, but in particular, Latino students. So in addition to Tech para Todos as a really important initiative and striving for that universal access to devices and connectivity, a few other things we'd love to see our politicians, our policymakers prioritizing as identified by our Latino before COVID as the top 3 issues that we think, that our educators think are most important for Latino children in the nation is 1, early childhood access, 2, increased representation of teachers and leaders in the education system, and college access and attainment and completion as 3 key priorities that our community, in addition to tech, would like to see improved, and where we need to see significant investment in order for our community to succeed and be part of the fabric of this nation that includes hope and opportunity. So with that, we thank you, Senator Markey, for joining us and elevating not only the issue of technology divide, but also the other inequities affecting our Latino students and families. And so we hope that you'll join us, as well as all the folks on the Facebook Live right now will help and join us in elevating these issues and priorities so that we can achieve the educational opportunity that we aspire to for our families and communities. So thank you.